have some sort of retirement account, you get what I'm going to show you up here in some form or fashion. So the first one we're going to look at is this very creative company, We're Not Good Concrete, and we're going to look at their balance sheet. So as I said before, you're going to see some very familiar phrases. So here's our equation again. Assets equals liabilities plus equity, excuse me. A balance sheet has to do what?
Balance.
Thank you. It would not be a balance sheet, that would be an imbalance sheet. So when we look at this, anything we do to the left-hand side of this equation, we have to do in the right-hand side of the equation. Now that's not like Enron, we're not doing some funny Bernie Madoff math here or something like that. It truly is kind of a, you take one away, you add one, and vice versa. And I'll explain what that means, but we're going to look at assets first. We've already started talking about what some of the assets we could possibly have. This is what Alden looks at on a pretty frequent basis, but it also applies to you personally. Also, all of these things have a decreasing level of liquidity. First of all, what does liquidity mean? How much of it is cash or can be converted to cash quickly? So, if we start at the top, this business here has $2.9 million in cash. The question is, how liquid is cash? It's pretty liquid. I can go to an ATM machine and it can spit out. Just like if you look up at your checking account, that is how liquid you actually are. As you go down the line, things become less liquid. For instance, accounts receivable are the things that we are owed. So those are the bills that go out to your customers. In this case, it's 13.2. How liquid is accounts receivable? Well, they're an IOU and we're owed it, but in theory, there's a little bit less liquidity there because we got 30, 40 days before we'll get it. But the good news is it will turn to cash at some point in time. There's a word up here, excess of billings on uncompleted contracts. This is something that's really tricky, and it's going to sound very weird when I say this. But this is the work you haven't done yet. So we are actually, in this particular case, actually I'm going to kind of show you these two here simultaneously because they look very similar. You've got this excess of billings and billings on uncompleted contracts. This one right here is over billings. So for instance, you go out there, you put $500,000 of work in at this Publix, but you bill Publix $1 million. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's a good thing. Why? Why is it a good thing? You got an extra $500,000. However, it's a liability. Why is it a liability? Because you still have $500,000 worth of work, or some portion, and I'm sure some was profit. So that, even though this is another example of people think liabilities are bad. No, they're not all bad, because that goes in this column. This is over billings. This is under billings, because this is work we are going to put in place. I know it seems counterintuitive, but you've been paid for it, you just haven't done the work yet. So you still have to do it. You are owing somebody. That's why it's on the liability side. Does that make sense to everybody? It's a really kind of a, people get really confused. You talk net excess of billings. We want to be overbilled 100%. Why? Because we don't want to be a loan to the customers. If you're underbilled, you're upside down. And we've already talked about what upside down is. Then we have net property and equipment. For instance, how liquid is this building that we're sitting in right now? Not very. Not to mention we kind of need it. We're still here. So you could put a for sale sign out front, but the simple fact is it's not the most liquid thing out there. Just like your trucks, we could sell them, but it's still not that liquid. So we went from really liquid to not so liquid. Then you have this column down here, goodwill and intangibles. What is goodwill? And I don't mean the charity.
Your reputation?
Reputation, for instance, all those fancy logos that I'm seeing staring out at me right now on shirts and hats. There is goodwill associated with the Benning name. Can I go to the bank and take a withdrawal on that goodwill? No, it's not liquid at all, in fact. But do you see, this is where, when it comes to, if I wanted to sell a business, it gets very complicated at this point. Why? Because those first items, it's cut and dry, isn't it? How much money you got in the bank, how much do you have in receivables, how much is this building worth? Well, that's easy enough to calculate. Now we're in the world of kind of gray. How much is the Benning name in the marketplace? Oh, I don't know. You say it's 3 million, I say it's 1 million. Who's right? That's this kind of variability. And to some extent, you know, does it depreciate or appreciate over time? I don't know. It depends too. The point is, it is an asset that's much harder to quantify and also withdraw upon. But you'll notice, 25 million bucks.
What's other assets?
Other assets could be like prepaid insurance, because that's an asset, but you're going to be withdrawing against that, so it's going to shift just like we have other liabilities. So just because you're prepaying the insurance or prepaid interest, but you're going to eventually withdraw upon it. So a balance sheet, and I'm glad you brought this up, I could take this snapshot today at Benning, and you know what? Tomorrow, the balance sheet could look 100% different. For instance, December 31st, if you did a balance sheet, and January 1st could be completely different. Now, this is where Alden spends a lot of his time, and it's not kind of playing funny math, but obviously, when we do our financial statements, who is also looking at these financial statements?
Sure, Sam.
Uncle Sam. So if you got a lot of cash in the business, what happens? What do you got to do? You got to pay taxes on it. So there is some, I don't want to say manipulation because that sounds very like not cool, but there are things that businesses do to make these financial statements do different things. So very important for us to know, a snapshot today is going to look completely different tomorrow. Where the income statement is, it is dynamic and always changing, but it's also going to be, once again, revenue at the top line, cost, it should be fairly static for the year. And we'll go in that in just a moment. Let's look over to the right-hand side. Liabilities at the top, these are all the things that we owe. In this case, it starts off with terms of liquidity. So accounts payable. Could we, those are the folks that are going to come to the kind of belly up to the bar first and say, pay me. Those are the people we owe, accounts payable. Line of credit or notes payable, mortgage. Then we have our over billings. Once again, that's still a liability, even though it's a good thing. We could have our total current liabilities and then any long-term liabilities. Maybe we have a 50-year mortgage or something like that. That's a possibility, but those are long-term debt. We might have securities, just like you would have securities yourselves as a person, where we owe or we've given people notes in the marketplace. Businesses do it all the time because they're using stockholders to kind of fund that. But then you have this other section called stockholder equity. And once again, this is the net worth of that business. So for instance, going back to my formula, you hear this word equity all the time. You use it when you talk about your house or your car. Once again, that's that difference between what I could buy the house for and what I owe. That difference, an example up on the board for, was $50,000. So what is this business worth? Once again, that's where we start to look at the ESOP value, what Mr. Benning has in terms of what he, as a stockholder or exiting stockholder, actually has. Those are all components of the equity. So once again, it's on this side of the equation because technically that's something that they are owed. And some of you are shareholders. Shareholders of, how many of you own General Electric stock, or Walmart stock, or Home Depot stock, or Coca-Cola? I think that's almost, if you live in Atlanta, that's probably a requirement. Point is, you are all stockholders. You would be in that box for Coca-Cola. So Coca-Cola looks at their entire balance sheet. You're in that bottom right-hand column. The point is, look at the math here. So liabilities, 16.4. The equity, or retained earnings, is that 8 or 9? $8.6 million, which, coincidentally enough, equals $25 million. Assets equals liabilities plus equity. And now we could look at this and say, all right, now I know what the business is worth as a whole. And we're going to talk in a little bit about so what. So we have all these numbers in the sheet. How do I know my business is good or not? Just by saying there's $2.9 million in the business and cash, does that mean I'm healthy? Well, not necessarily. I mean, I could go to the doctor and he could tell me I have great cholesterol, my blood sugar's right, but I think we could probably rest assured Greg needs to lose some weight. So, simple fact is, when you look at this, you got to look at the total picture as well as what we're going to look at in a moment, which are our ratios. So, this is our balance sheet. Then we have our income statement for We're Not Good Concrete. Revenue, you already looked at this a short time ago. We talked about that dollar breakdown. So we've got sales of $70 million. Then we have roughly, for this company, $80 million, 80% of that $70 million is all direct costs. Labor, material, subs, other, equipment, and that accounts for $56.1 million. And then we have our gross profit, and we take out our overhead, and that leaves us with $3 million, which is 4.3% net. Does everyone follow the math so far? So we take this kind of very systematic approach. We also then can look at, once again, what is our retained earnings. And once again, the retained earnings is the money that we're keeping in the business. Because once again, what is a business worth? If I take all the money out of the business, I'm going to be taxed. But if I'm keeping the money in the business, which is also what surety, your banking institution, any lenders, they want to see that you're not withdrawing all the money and stripping out all the value of the business. So we're keeping some money in the business, but we also have to pay our shareholders. This is what happens when you see dividends posted. Dividends are those things that when you have your Coca-Cola stock, they'll give you 50 cents a share for whatever that dividend is. Well, that's after they're keeping some money in the business, they're paying their people, you get kind of that little differential, and that's that dividend that you hear about. And that, once again, you might say, well, 50 cents, why don't they keep it for themselves? Well, if you have a lot of stock in Coca-Cola or Home Depot or any business, that's what we keep funding the business. You as an ESOP, for instance, we keep money in the business and then you get to reap the benefit of it. It goes as part of your long-term deferred compensation or retirement funding. So this is an example of the income statement. We've talked about several of these, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time. I want to just recap and say the asset. This is anything tangible. In some cases intangible, because goodwill is not very tangible. But these are the things we actually own. For you personally, this is your house, your car, the cash you have in the bank. You know, those are, or an insurance policy. You know, that's an asset. Now, you have to pay your premiums. That's the liability side. But you have an insurance policy, that's considered an asset. Same thing with us as a business. Liability, those are all the things we owe. So anything we own, anything we owe. Good clarification. Equity, that's what it's worth. You've probably heard this before, my net worth. You hear about like celebrities and you know whoever, what is that person worth? Well, that's what we're talking about, net. What are they actually worth? Our excess of billings, we want to once again constantly be overbilled. Obviously there's an ethical overbilling here. We don't want to be doing this crazy because customers will start to go, wait a second, you're billing me $1 million, but you only did $500,000 worth of work. Well, that's not good business. On the other hand, you do want to be overbilled because it doesn't say the First National Bank of Benning out front. You are not to be a loan for your customers. You know, we got to make sure that we're doing this profitably. And heck, if it's a heck of a lot easier for Publix to do this than for Benning. They have a little bit more cash, I believe. The net, you'll notice I keep using the word net. Why am I using net and not gross?
Gross has got things taken away. Net is the actual.
Net's the final, when all the dust settles, that's the number. Gross, you mentioned this before. You said, well, we're part of overhead. And I forget who said it, but you know, the building is overhead. Some companies push that above the line. Put it a different way, they direct cost their project managers, their trucks, their accountants, their estimators. Yes, they're estimators. They push them to direct cost and make sure the overhead is as low as possible. It doesn't matter what you do or what's your philosophy. At the end of the day, it all comes down to that. So you could be making 20% gross, but your overhead is 15%. Or you could be making 20% gross and your, you know, whatever the net comes out to be is the bottom line. So that's why it's the ultimate normalization or equalizer, as I like to say. And then receivable are the things that we bill. So, why do we do all this? We're going to be looking at it in terms of return, level of risk, and liquidity. Cash flow and liquidity is the amount of money that we're generating or cash that we're generating as a business. Return. Just like we say, we want to see a return. When I put money in the bank in a savings account, which is probably not the best use of money at this point in time, you know, I want to see a return on my investment. When you buy a stock, a share of Coca-Cola, and I don't know what Coca-Cola costs now, but let's say it's $100. I want to know that when I cash out, that was $100 is now $200. And that's a lot of growth, I might add, because that's why I'm investing in it. It's called return on your investment, or ROI. And then risk. You know, what is the chance that something could happen? For instance, if I put money in a savings account, as low as that savings account would be, am I pretty much assured that there's going to be some level of growth there? Yeah, it's going to be pennies. If I put $1 in a savings account and go back after 50 years, it's going to be like $1.50 maybe after 50 years. Not a whole lot of money in there. On the other hand, when we talk about risk, you know, if I told you a stock and said, boy, I got the stock tip for you. There's this company called Biogenics. I don't even know if that's a word, but Biogenics, they make this really weird medicine and you can go buy it, but it's one of those risky stocks. You're going to expect a sizable return. A lot of risk, hopefully a lot of reward. You wouldn't put $1 in and then say, oh, I'm sorry, you know, it's you lost all your money. And that's obviously could happen. But when we talk about risk, this comes back to us. 2 to 4% or points, that's the amount of return we're getting as a business. But the risk is so much bigger for us. So we are in the risk management business. How do we limit our profile? So we're going to talk about a couple words here. First, working capital. Then we're going to talk about aging receivables, aging payables, and age of underbillings. So when we start to go through, we're going to take these numbers directly off of that balance sheet and income statement that I just showed you. So we've got the information right there. So we talk about liquidity. You know, this is the money that we're generating. Profitable operation, timely collection of accounts receivable, timely payments out, because we're one big throughput here. The money that comes in is going to go out, and there's that, I call it delta, not the airline, but that time. So if we're collecting 10 bucks, but as the young lady in the back said, we got to pay $8 because, well, subs want to get paid. I don't know how dastardly of them for that. You know, we have to manage that process and make sure that what's coming in is also going out in a timely fashion. Sufficient unused balance on this line of credit for contingencies. Once again, I don't want to take my credit card out unless I absolutely, positively have to use the line of credit. It's like the credit card you got in your wallet for when your engine blows up or you have a catastrophic emergency at your house. I don't want to have to use it, but I've got it there just in case. Now, that doesn't mean I use it to go buy the big screen TV, like we talked about before, because that's a bad use of credit, unless, of course, your big screen TV blows up. And then making sure we have that cash on hand. How do we measure liquidity? This is the word for working capital. So once again, think of it as working money. That's another translation of it. So it's the money we're going to use throughout this process so I don't have to dip into the line of credit. We're going to use the money from operations to fund this business rather than go to the special credit card. So, give you some idea, what is working capital? First, it's all things underneath that current asset and current liability column. So cash, AR, inventory, and underbillings. Current liabilities is accounts payable, accrued expenses, short-term notes, bank line of credit, and overbillings. And what is that delta? So, how much is the right amount of working capital for any sort of business? So one of the first things we got to think about, can you have too much working capital? The answer is technically yes, because once again, for instance, if I look at all the money I have in my account, let's just say I've got $100 in my checking account, so that's $100 cash, but let's say I only owe at the end of the month $1. So I got $100 and I pay out $1. That leaves me with $99. Now the question should be, should I just keep $99 in my bank account? Why not? You're shaking your head and you're actually right. Why shouldn't I do that?
Because you have the ability to make more money with your money?
Exactly. So just having $99 sitting in my bank account, it might be a bad thing because I might feel the risk or need to go withdraw $99 and go blow it on something stupid. Or I could put it in a long-term thing. What is that thing? Should I take 50 of that dollars and, hey, I don't want to spend all $99 and put it into like retirement or something like that, but maybe I take $50 and buy some stock somewhere. But I can't touch it because now it's not current anymore. Does that make sense to everybody? But at least I've got, if my math is right, $49 sitting there as working capital to pay my bills, so I never still have to use the credit card, but I've still got money that's being deployed. Think of it as like efficiency. Do you want, if you won the lottery tomorrow, or tonight, I think the lottery goes off tonight. If you won the Georgia lottery tonight, and would you take that $100 million from the Powerball and just let it sit in your bank account? Most of you would probably go, well, probably not. That's not a very efficient system. Most of you would say, I would invest it. And I would maybe keep some of it, maybe go on a nice vacation, but I'm going to put that money somewhere else, but it's no longer current. And what we typically see for contractors is roughly 10% of our revenues. So in this case, what was our revenue for We're Not Good Construction? How much money was it? Does anyone remember? 70 million. So in theory, we should have $7 million in working capital. But let's see where we actually are. So in our example, we have 19.8 minus $14.6 million, which leaves us with $5.2 million of working capital. So tell me, you're all going to be, I'm going to put your consulting hat on for a second. We're Not Good Concrete. How are you feeling about their working capital? They're a little low. They're not negative. And trust me, you can be negative here. That's not good. Negative's bad. However, we're not probably where we should be. What if something catastrophic happened in our business? What happened if I had a roof leak on my house? Do I have enough to weather that storm? That's why we got to make sure we have healthy working capital. So that's one of our first calculations. Now, to make sure we've got good working capital, we've got to make sure we're collecting the money because, my friend, what is king? Cash. AR is IOU. I owe you $1 million. As I already told you, the figure I told you before with that one client was 90 days. 90 days from the time they invoiced to the time they got paid. And this guy here, as greedy as he is, he says he doesn't want to get paid once every 90 days. I don't know what kind of deal you're running. Yeah. However, he likes to be difficult. However, I kind of get it. So we need to be looking at what is our aging receivables. And this is an actual calculation that I'm going to show you. It's kind of a weird calculation though, because all it does is look at accounts receivable divided by your annual revenue divided by 365. So yes, there's two divided bys there, which is actually multiplied. So in this case, we have 13.2 divided by 70 divided by 365, which gives us 60, let's just round up to 69 days. So, how do I feel about this? You're shaking your head back there and you would be very correct. The actual number that you should be depends, which I know sounds like a typical consultant answer, isn't it? It depends. Now, it really depends on the type of work you're doing. If you're a trade contractor, obviously the closer to the money, for instance, you work for Publix, but let's say we're Not Good Concrete. We're Not Good Concrete works for Benning, who works for Publix. Do you think I would have a longer AR or a shorter AR?
Longer.
Longer. And it's not that you're holding on to money like a bunch of misers or anything like that. It's just the old adage of stuff rolling downhill. That's exactly what we're talking about here. What if we're the concrete supplier for We're Not Good Concrete that works for Benning, that works for Publix? Well, now all of a sudden we've got, we're 5 steps removed. Well, the point is, it's probably going to be further out. Now, suppliers don't always have and I was going to bring this up a little bit earlier, but paid when paid. Paid when paid is a fancy word. What does that mean? I'll pick on you in the back because I know you talked about it before.
Paid when paid means that once you're paid, then you pay your bill.
However, suppliers don't always subscribe to that. It's not that they don't follow the rules. They're not beholden to that because if they have a purchase order versus a subcontract, subcontracts usually are tied to the general contract, which is the contract that you all sign. You can connect subcontract to general contract. Purchase orders, they don't think like that. For instance, if I go to Home Depot right now and buy a bunch of supplies for, we'll pick a different, well, for AMC theaters, we'll pick a different customer this time. And AMC doesn't pay me for 60 days, but Home Depot comes to me and says, you owe me $50,000 for all that stuff you bought. But if I tell Home Depot, you don't understand, AMC hasn't paid us yet, what does Home Depot tell me? They're like, I don't care, you know, pound sand, you find the money, you owe us. We're not connected to AMC, or any customer for that matter. So in this case, how do we feel? We don't feel good. We're right about 70 days. The industry average is about between 35 and 45 days, which I know is kind of a broad brush, but it really depends on where you are in the food chain. So we're not doing so good. Is this an indicator that this company is going the wrong direction? The answer is possibly. As my job, I would kind of go, whoa, 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 stop the clock. This is not going in the right direction. The other end of the spectrum is accounts payable. So how well are we paying our subs? Are we paying in kind of lockstep with how we're getting paid? So looking at the example, accounts payable divided by annual revenue divided by 365. Roughly 32 days doing all that math. What are you noticing here? Yeah, we're kind of upside down. We're paying everybody well ahead of when we're getting paid. So the good news is our subs are probably quite happy because they're getting paid. However, we're in a position that we're upside down. So do we have an AR problem or do we have an AP problem? The answer is it could be a little bit of both. We're not maybe proactively managing our billing process. Scratch that. We're not proactively managing our collection process. The other thing to be thinking about, and this was really fascinating. I had this recently with a client I want to share with you. This was a company, they were right about 85 days for their, by the way, the word that you use is aging of accounts receivable or DSO, which is called Days Sales Outstanding. So if you ever hear that word DSO, you now know what it means. But their DSO was 85 days, which is not good. Their AP aging was 80 days. So the fascinating thing was they were not getting paid well and they weren't paying their subs on time, except they were actually doing their subcontractors a solid. What do you think I mean by that?
They're paid before they were paid.
They were paid, they were doing their subcontractors a service, albeit if you asked their subs, the subs were going, you guys are screwing me over, you're paying me in 80 days, this sucks. On the other hand, they were doing it to kind of keep their subs. They were doing something but not getting credit for it, if you want to think of it like that. And the funny thing was, everybody in their company thought they were slow payers, when in fact, they're slow collectors. And it was all their project managers in their group, who, by the way, were responsible for collecting the money, but all of they blamed all of the accounting staff in this company. Oh yeah, did I hit a nerve in the back? No, it was funny because everyone I said, and the accountant told me, she goes, I know I'm the redheaded stepchild in the room, I get it. Ironically, she was redheaded, but that was another story. She goes, I get it. She goes, our PMs aren't doing their job. And I'm actually trying to help them by paying their subs, because their subs were starting to say, I'm not going to show up on the job till you pay me. So once again, they were actually doing a good thing that was a bad thing, but it was a good thing, if that could fit all those characteristics. Then we look at age of underbillings. Here's a fascinating phenomenon that it does occur. This could be a mask or a symptom of a bigger problem. For instance, remember that job that I told you a few moments ago? So let's say we do $500,000 worth of work and we bill Publix for $1 million. We all said we're happy because we have 500,000. But let's flip that around now. We do $1 million worth of work, but get paid for $500,000. I think we'd all agree we don't feel good about that because now we had to come out of pocket $500,000. But what else could be happening here? Could this be a symptom of a bigger disease? What happens in a lot of organizations is this concept of being chronically underbilled, you may never ever get out from underneath that. So you could go, let's just say if I was an unethical project manager and all of us to come to me and say, hey Greg, why are you $500,000 underbilled? Don't worry, we'll make it up in the end. We're good for it, we're good for it. Everything will work itself out in the wash. Next month comes, we're $500,000, we're still $500,000 behind. No, by the end of this project we'll be okay. What I'm not actually doing is realizing that we have cost overruns. But because the underbilling is occurring, it's not allowing me to show that I'm still, is it a billing problem or is it a cost problem? Do you follow that logic? So once again, we got to be very careful with this to know that is it a job loss problem or something bigger? So in this case, underbillings, same type of calculation, roughly 8.3 days of underbilling time. That's that kind of that component that lets us know we're basically having to float things on average for 8 days based on this calculation we've shown. Once again, does that mean I'm now dipping into the line of credit? Once again, by itself, we may be okay, but remember we did that calculation about our working capital and we're not where we need to be. So we are probably having to dip into our line of credit. So we're not good concrete, maybe starting to show some signs of issues. So then we get to some of the fun calculations. And these are fancy ratios that you can use for yourself, you can use to look at your projects. Once again, it doesn't matter what I'm measuring, but I can look at return on investment, return on assets, and return on equity. So for instance, as a stockholder in my own company, I want to know, should I invest in my company, FMI, or am I better suited to take $100 and invest in Coca-Cola or Delta or any other company? I want to know who's going to provide my best return on my investment and best return on my equity. The return on equity is the dividend that I'm going to be getting. So am I going to be seeing some sort of return on that? Am I going to get a dividend every year from Coca-Cola? Was it 50 cents or is it $1? At the same time, return on my investment. When I sell out, when I'm 60 years old at FMI, I have to start selling my stock back. So I want to know, is that investment I made, if I buy $100, is it going to be $200 or does it stay at $100? Well, that seems kind of silly. Why would I give you $100 to just give me $100 back? That's a bad investment. Some of you remember Popeye? Popeye had a famous quote. Does anyone remember what that was?
I am what I am.
Well, no, that was Popeye. I am what I am.
You just said what was
Oh, I'm
Popeye's
sorry.
favorite-
Wimpy. Sorry, Darcy. Sorry. So, Wimpy. That's the guy I was referring to. What?
Yes.
Exactly. That's exactly what we're talking about. Why would I pay $1 to just get $1 back? Well, I want to pay $1, so you give me $2 later. So we're going to look at these calculations, and now we're going to look and see. We're going to take our income statement calculations as well as our balance sheet and cross-reference them. So, return on equity, the net income before taxes, this thing right here, divided by the owner's equity. So once again, all of us are owners in this business in some way, shape, or form. So we're taking our $3 million divided by the $8.6 million. leaves us with 35% return on equity. That's a pretty good return. So once again, I'm feeling pretty strong about my investment in we're not good. So you can be good on one category, just like I may be overweight, but my cholesterol may be high or not high, or my blood sugar. I mean, once again, you can be okay in some areas, but not okay in others. You have to look at it, the total picture, to get a good flavor. Return on total, did I skip one? Sorry. No, that was the net worth, okay. The total assets, net income before taxes divided by our total assets. Why do you think this calculation is so important? Return on our assets.
Want money from what we invest.
That's a good one. We got money for things that we're going to invest, but if I go out and buy a front end loader, I'll just use an example. So I go to Caterpillar, and I don't know what a front end loader goes for. I think it's about $250,000. So I go buy this piece of equipment for $250,000. What do I want that front end loader to do for me?
Make money.
I want it to work, I want it to be utilized, and at the end of the year, I want to go, was that a good investment? Did it return me some money? So for instance, you know, when you think about putting investments into your house, you know, let's say you're going to go ahead and you know, buy a pool. You know, you're going to dig a big, nice hole and put a nice pool in. You know, $20,000, whatever pool goes for. You know, the idea is it's kind of the same instinct. We're taking an asset. Yeah, we're having to spend some money. We're going to spend some money to make some money, and that's the same thing here. Should I put that pool in my house if my house is only worth $20,000? The answer is like, you might not realize the total return on that. In fact, you might end up upside down. So if we're not going to use the front end loader and get it to its maximum efficiency, rent it. So here's our return on assets is about 12%. And then here is the calculation we've been talking about all day long. Net income before taxes divided by revenue gives us 4.3% net. And that's the one that we keep talking about. So once again, we're able to take our revenue and our net income and provide this total return. That's how the formulaic component is done. The last piece of this is our risk. I got to measure my risk daily, monthly, weekly, annually to make sure we're hedging our bet. And we do this all the time, you know, as individuals to make sure, am I getting myself into it? If I'm getting close to retirement, are my investments in risky stocks, you know, kind of that wacko biogenic stock, or am I covered in maybe Coca-Cola, Home Depot? Did I put it in a mutual fund that's very conservative? Do I put it in a savings account because, hey, at this point, you know, we just want to protect our wealth. So we're going to look at our risk. The first one is current ratio. Current ratio, if you say, boy, this sounds really familiar, this is a lot like the working capital one, except it's a ratio. The other one was an actual number. This one is current assets divided by current liabilities. In this case, this company here is right about 1.2. So, what's the right number? This is an example of that efficiency of our assets that we talked about earlier. Much like we said, we don't want too much working capital. We want to be in a nice sweet spot or stay in your lane, bro. You know, kind of that kind of category. 1.5 to 2 is the right amount. What we're saying is we're right side up. For instance, let's say my current ratio was 0.75. What would that say to you if my current ratio was 0.75?
Liabilities and assets.
My liabilities are higher than my assets, which means what? You owe more than you're worth, which is another word for saying what?
You're
You're upside down. Exactly. We have a lot of clients that are upside down. I have one in New Jersey I'm working with right now that, let's just say, it's upside down. The boat's kind of also in the middle of an awful whirlpool and circling the drain. That's another story for another day. My point is, 1.5 to 2 is the right range. It's saying that we've got the right amount of current stuff to current liabilities. What if my current ratio was 4.5? Well, 4.5 is higher than 1.2. How do I feel about that?
That's it, outweigh your liability.
My assets outweigh my liabilities. Do I feel good about that ratio?
What are your assets doing?
Exactly. It's like my friend over here said before. Am I efficient, or am I sitting on that $100 million Powerball ticket that I just put in my checking account? That's not a good thing. It means, good news is I got a lot of cash. The bad news is it's inefficient. It could be making me more money somewhere else. So maybe knock that down and put some of it in non-current, long-term assets. Yes, that ratio will go down, but I'm going to be more efficient in the long run.
So, hold on.
Yes, sir.
You said you want to be at 1.5 to 2.
Correct.
So, am I hearing you right? That would be 0.75 to 1?
No, I'm sorry. No, I'm not following
The
you.
first number only, the range is.
The range.
1.5.
Okay, not the 2, 1, okay.
Right, it's
Yeah,
1.2 ... It's the ratio. My apologies for the
Okay,
confusion
that's
there.
what I was looking
Yeah,
at.
this is 1.5 dash to 2.0. That's what I was referring to.
Okay.
Thank you for the debt to equity ratio. This is exactly like we've been talking about with this upside down. Total liabilities to equity. Think of your house in this example. Your car that you have at your house. So what is it worth? And, what do I owe on it divided by what it's worth? So my house is $200,000. That's what the house is worth. I owe $100,000. So that's good. I've got that amount of equity. Once again, we don't want to be too high or too low. In this case, 1.9 ... to 1. That's that ratio again. And then once again, our working capital turnover. Net revenue divided by the working capital. In this case, the churn. This is a fancy word for how much we're churning through this money. A dollar that comes in, think of it, not that we're laundering money. That's an awful choice of words. But yeah, it's also illegal. But when we talk about this churn, money that's coming in and we're working through this working capital, we want to see an efficient churn. We don't want to see stagnancy. We also don't want to see to where if it's too short or too long, we might be kind of dipping into that line of credit. So how much time is, how much turnover do we have in any single year? So when you think about this concept of cash flow, everything we've talked about up to this point, work is complete, send invoice, accounts receivable, receive bills, and collect it. Folks, our biggest, obviously all of these, they're like my children, you love them all equally. But this is the one where the rubber meets the road. Without this one, it doesn't matter. Because what, mister in the front row?
Cash is king.
Thank you. We'll keep going back to that one. This is that IOU. But this is the thing that happens, and we at FMI, we call this the bathtub. Albeit it doesn't look like a bathtub. Think of it like this. That middle line right there is kind of that is the bathtub itself. We got this drain coming in the top of the tub. Not drain, a spigot or faucet coming in. So money's coming in the top of the tub, but then all these drains are kind of plugging out the bottom there. So we go ahead, we got that thing called overhead. Trickle, trickle, trickle. Labor. It's coming out. Like I said, this guy wants to get paid weekly, as greedy as he is. Our material obligations. Equipment. If we have any equipment that's rented, they're going to want to get paid. The good news is, as my friend in the back said, we've got paid when paid. But do you see somewhat of an inequity here? The amount of money coming in compared to the amount of money going out at the bottom. So you get a paycheck yourself, but we all know you got to pay your electric bill, your gas bill, your cable bill, your car payment, your mortgage payment, put a little money in for savings, and then you're left with the net profit, which is money you're going to go spend this weekend when you go out to dinner with your spouse. That's what you get to keep. However, there's another piece of this too, which we really haven't talked about, which is retention. What is retention, by the way?
What you keep it.
Well, no, that's not the retained earnings, just to be clear. This is the money that the customer holds on to. Why are they holding on to your money?
Making sure you did a quality job.
Yeah, they're gonna, and what's as a percentage, what is most of our retention here at Benning? 10%. What are most of our projects' gross profit, by the way?
Less than that.
Interesting. Yeah, it's kind of, you see a little inequity once again. We're upside down to some extent. Do we ever do any bonded work?
Yes.
Well, what's a bond?
Sure.
Guaranteed fund.
Well, wait a second. You just told me a second ago retention was insurance that we're going to do the job. So why do we need a bond?
So that they know they're gonna get paid.
Ah,
The work's gonna be done.
but you have the bond to make sure you do the work. I'm sort of arguing with myself on this one. I get it, folks. Do you see, once again, another inequity in our industry? We have this thing called retention, which doesn't even amount to our profit in some cases. Oh, by the way, when do you get retention?
A year later.
A year later, but you've done the work. So once again, that'd be like me holding a couple bucks from my Chipotle bill last night and not paying them for a year. So they never get to realize their profitability for a year from now. But we also got this thing called a bond, which is a second form of insurance, that if we go bust, their Publix or supermarket will get built. It just seems kind of wacky and how backwards our industry is. And we're one of the only industries, short of maybe the medical industry, that has this fundamental flaw, built in. Now, a lot of industries have where you will do the work and then send an invoice. On the other hand, they also don't have a thing called retention. There are many states that have actually outlawed retention or reduced it. And I think California is one of them. They also have very interesting paid when paid clauses. Some states have actually ruled them completely illegal. So now